Hi, guys and gals. Shane again at the Buffalo Naval Park for this installment of 29 and 29. And again, hope you're enjoying them. This is a complex video, so I hope you enjoy it. Put Steve's editing skills to work here. This is part presentation, PowerPoint, part on the ship walking around. So hope this was a subject matter that a subscriber came to me about 5 months ago. Saying, hey, why don't you do something on some of the conversions of the Cleveland's to Independence class carriers? All right, so that's kind of, this is the growth out of that conversation. All right, well, don't want to spend any more time. Let's get to the PowerPoint. All right, how the U.S. Navy reconfigured Cleveland's to Independences is. First off, right off the bat, let's go through the ships of the class. There were 9 total: Independence, Princeton, Bella Wood, Cowpens, Monterey, Langley, Cabot, Baton, and San Jacinto. All right, and then you can see, since they were all going to be Cleveland's, you can see their names prior to that. Oh, and take a look. There's the second Buffalo that was going to be the Cleveland class that was canceled. When you're talking about carriers in World War II, these are the ones that, as a whole, you focus on, right? These were the ones that were constructed during World War II. You have the Bogue class, Sangamon class, Casablanca class, and Commencement Bay class, all that were considered escort or jeep carriers. All right, you have the 9 Independence class that we'll be focusing on today. And then the larger ones, the Essex class, those are the ones that everyone loves, that when you think of an aircraft carrier, these are the ones you think of. And of course, you can see 4 of them today as museum ships. There's also the Midway class, but USS Midway, I think, came into commission 8 days after the Japanese surrender on USS Missouri. So they were in construction for World War II. And again, wargaming, War Plan Orange, that the U.S. Navy relied on for conflicts with Japan. There was some belief that the war would at least go till 1947, 1948. So those Midway classes would have been right in the thick of it. A little of the overview of the Independence class. We're looking at an overall length of 622 feet. That is the added gun tub on the back of the stern, which I'll show when I actually start walking around. The beam was 109. They added blisters to the hull and, of course, then the flight deck. Traditionally, a Cleveland class is about 66 feet in the widest point of the beam. Aircraft, they can carry up to 30 planes, 31, 32 if you really needed to cram them in there. But interesting to note that the Clevelands had already been carrying about 4 reconnaissance planes, the Kingfishers or the Seahawks. And so that's an interesting comparison. And for the officers and crew, Little Rock carried around 1,200. For the Independence class, they would have had about 1,400 men on board. Here's some images. You see the elevator coming through, and then the curtain open to the water. On the left, you see a nice stern shot of that, and that stern quad gun tub that I was talking about. Here are 2 nice photographs of the flight deck. And you have a nice profile view down there on the bottom and a nice forward-looking view of the Independence class. And then probably leading the line, and then the next in line is an Essex, more than likely. And you can almost see those differences. I mean, just look at this width of the superstructure. how much more complex it would be on the Essex carriers. So a little background now. The Independence-class carriers during wargaming exercises at the Naval War College throughout the interwar period, Navy leaders realized that carriers could be the first line for three things: protection, attacking, and scouting. All right, they needed to be large enough to absorb inevitable losses and still have a large enough air wing then to be considered efficient and worth the expenditure. They had a few carriers at their disposal, thank you to the Washington Naval Treaty, all right, where they were able to convert a couple battleships into the Lexington and the Saratoga. But then they also had the Ranger and the Long Island to experiment with and to test and to try out different platforms. All right, President Roosevelt was a big proponent of the secondary uses of carriers, which is right in line with the Independence and escorts. That's convoy escort, especially in the Atlantic, anti-submarine warfare, and aircraft escort, all right, bringing planes, material to the Essex-class carriers. Interesting to note that the merchant ship Mormackmel, I believe is how you pronounce that. Mormackmel. All right. And they took that and converted it to the USS Long Island auxiliary carrier. And as an experimental or concept ship, she did better than is expected when addressing those secondary uses of carriers that I talk about just, a couple bullet points up. The problem was she didn't have great speed. 17 knots, being a merchant ship, all right, that's one propeller. All right, at 17 knots, you're being left behind steaming from Pearl Harbor to Guadalcanal or the Philippines. So she did great in experiments for what they wanted her to do. The biggest drawback was the speed itself. And so the Cleveland-class cruisers became the leading candidate for conversions into these faster carriers. All right, they're more modern in design than, of course, the cruisers prior to them, built in the 30s. They were built in high numbers. All right, 26 were ultimately completed. One was unfinished. And then with the planning of how many they had, they were able to take these 9 and still have a formidable Cleveland-class force. But the most important thing is they were able to keep pace with the fleet. All right, most of the issues with them they found were the pitching and the rolling of the ship. Of course now, because you're building a superstructure that is not a Cleveland-class cruiser superstructure, the flight deck, the planes, all of the associated equipment, and so they're really top heavy. You had cramped spaces, not only for the in the hangar deck, but also you're putting about 200 extra guys on board the ship. And therefore, for these reasons, they were more prone to aviation mishaps. Planes sliding off the deck into the water, landing was more difficult, takeoffs were a little more difficult because of the pitch and roll of the deck. All right, one of the conversations that Roosevelt had with the General Board, and of course Admiral Leahy and King with the General Board, was that the General Board was interested in perfecting these carriers. They found them as not perfect. And so Roosevelt used the perfect is the enemy of good paradigm and said, let's build them. We have 9 available. Build them. We'll deal with the problems as they arise when they're in the combat zones. So right off the bat, same number of decks down below. As we'll see in the video, there's reconstruction going on and reconfiguring going on, but they had a second deck, third deck, first platform, second platform, and a hold, just like the Cleveland-class cruisers. I've already talked about 150, 200 more men aboard. Uptakes were a major configuration change. I'll show you that here, but I'll also show you that as we walk around. So on the left is the Cleveland class. That's the USS Miami, right? Traditional, the two, the alternating fire room, engine room configuration, the uptakes coming up, connecting the two boilers in each room, and then out the funnel. Taking a look on the right-hand side, you'll see it's a long view now. All right, it's fore to aft view, or aft. It says looking forward, so it's aft to forward. Right, you'll see the engine room down there at the bottom, but you'll see instead of the uptakes going straight up, boom, now they are curving off to starboard. And I'll show you some of those areas in the video, but you can see it's coming through the main deck, second deck, and then it comes out and then above the flight deck. So some of the other changes were addition of different rooms, like the catapult engine room, right? You wouldn't have needed those to the extent or the redundancies as you would have for a carrier as opposed to a cruiser. The Clevelands, again, were chosen because their plants could satisfy either configuration. With 100,000 shaft horsepower across 4 shafts and propellers, each out giving 25,000 shaft horsepower, you can get a top speed of about 32.5. Right, with the extended length of about 12 feet, with the extended width, well, now about 50 feet, their top speed as an Independence was still a very admirable 31.5, so only about 1 knot less than an actual Cleveland class. Because of the topside weight, they increased the beam and the hull, not the beam, but the hull, roughly 5 feet by adding blisters to the sides of the ship. Right now, Cleveland classes have the tumble home design where they come out from almost like a teardrop. They come out from the main deck and meet then at the keel. So in addition to that tumble home, now they're putting 5 feet. A good question, I do not have this right off the bat, but a good question, is it 5 feet on both sides, or is it 2.5 feet for a total of 5 feet? Of course, you're changing and reconfiguring damage control systems, piping, feeding systems, electrical systems, especially in the superstructure. So it needed a whole retooling and reconfiguration. For the armament platform, you had 2 quad Bofor tubs fore and aft, right? 9 twins, right? Fore and aft and along the flight deck, and 18 single 20 millimeters. So they used the close-up anti-aircraft, right? They didn't have 3-inch guns or 5-inch guns because of that weight, and then the support structures to hold the weight of the mounts and the associated ammunition. So really just that closer in Bofor and Oerlikon platform. So for the Independence and Cleveland class, continuing the comparison observations for the superstructure. All right, for this designation, this is the USS Monterey. I'll talk about it a little bit when I'm filming on board. The red line that I inserted is the main deck. All right, so of course you have you're adding a gallery deck, a forecastle deck, hangar spaces, the poop deck, and the flight deck. So of course, forward, midships, and aft, you have the whole flight deck on the top. In the forward section of the ship, with what's this showing, this blueprint is showing, is the main deck, the red line, the forecastle deck, all right, and then the gallery deck. And if you look to the left side of this blueprint, you'll see the forecastle and the gallery written. Midships dedicated to hangar spaces, like we saw in that photograph, the elevator coming up all right, with the side curtains. And now aft is the main deck and a poop deck. So here's the midships of the Independence class. You can see most of it is for, and again, the red line is the main deck. So most of it is for the hangar deck. And you can see right above it, they built another platform, and they have various piping systems underneath that. So on top of the main deck, that might be 2, 3, 4 feet. They built another deck or another platform. And then in that space, then they were putting, systems, piping systems, electrical wiring systems, things like that. And here is the stern of the USS Monterey. Right now you can see, again, the red line is the main deck. And now you can see, unlike the forward section of the ship near the bow, which had 3 decks, this only has 2. It has the main deck and then a poop deck and then the flight deck. So I hope you liked that part of a little introduction to the Independence class carriers, some of those changes. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go on board and I'm going to show you around some of those spaces. So why don't you come and follow me? So since the USS Little Rock is the last Cleveland or Galveston class in the world, I'm going to attempt to show you and for you to imagine some of those differences that I talked about in the PowerPoint. All right, one of the first things that I did was the plans that you saw with the red line, that's the USS Monterey. And that was the only plan I found online for an Independence class carrier where it showed an inboard profile. So let's take the Monterey. I've looked at it, and the superstructure appears to start right at about frame 6. So I'm on the bow. Let's check it out. So we have frame 2 right here. Here's frame 4. And here's frame 6. So if we're looking at those plans and looking that it seems as though it starts about 24, 25 feet from the bow, starting here, you are getting that welded superstructure. And look at all of that space that is now covered by the flight deck. Right, I can imagine, because the flight deck is over here, that a lot of the stuff inherent to the Clevelands, like the positioning and placement of the anchor chains, the anchor windlass, the hawsers, that would have stayed the same. The venting. And up here, we would have had, all right, the quad gun tub. Somewhere around here, the twin Beaufort gun tub. All right, so this is this is a lot of space that's being repurposed. And when you're looking at it on a blueprint, you're like, oh, okay, well, now when you come up here, you see how much space was actually dedicated. So imagine just from the observation deck, the 04 level, all of this would have been covered to about here, right, with only this part exposed. About 24, 25 feet. And again, right here is where that welded superstructure would have started, where they just welded right on to create the forward decks, right around here, and then moving forward. I'm sorry, moving aft. All right, let's check out another space. So something that confounded me at first was the the length. All of a sudden, an Independence class carrier is 11 feet longer than a Cleveland class. All right, it took me about 2 minutes or so, and I said, wait a second. There is a gun tub on the stern that was not there directly on the centerline stern of the Cleveland class, but it was there for the Independence. So that gun tub must be the thing that extends out 10, 11, 12 feet to give it its 622 length as opposed to a 610 length. So I've come back to the stern. All right, and so now you can imagine extending outward here. 11 or 12 feet would be another quad 40 gun tub Beaufort. All right, and that's what probably gives it the extra 11 or 12 feet. So again, the flight deck would end roughly around here. Now we're looking at frame 146 or so, 148. And then you just have the gun tub peeking out from the back of the ship. All right, so it would have been here. If I'm remembering right, they did move the flagpole, right, the ensign pole, the staff. All right, so if you're going up, whoop, sorry birds, I must have scared them. Coming out 11 feet, that might be where this platform ends right here, potentially. Maybe even extending out a little bit farther from that. So if you're comparing right, our elevator platform, that might be 10 feet or so. So maybe even going out a little bit farther from that. Because we know on submarines, sometimes they cut them and re-welded, you know, a 5-foot extension. But they wouldn't have done that for the Clevelands. Just too much to re-weld. So I looked at the blueprints again and said, aha, it must be that platform on the back. All right, let's check out another spot. Now for potentially the most dynamic adjustment to the interior of the Cleveland class when it's going into an Independence class would be the uptake vents and the plenums and the venting for the boilers. It had the same engineering system, that's why they chose the Clevelands. As I showed in the PowerPoint, they really, even though she was about 60 feet wider, and they added the 5-foot blisters on each side, they really only lost about 1 knot as a top speed. So they kept the alternating fire and engine rooms just like we have today here on Little Rock. But I am in the aft engine room, I'm sorry, the aft fire room. All right, and here's boiler number 3. Here's boiler number 4. And so if you looked at that, that plan was from the USS Miami. All right, where nice uptakes, they come together. Each boiler goes into, both boilers go into one uptake. And then you see it from the profile, the longitudinal or long profile for the USS Monterey. You'll see that they actually curve and come out on starboard. So if we have, here's the beginnings of the uptake for boiler 3. Right here, this whole mechanism, also up there, right, and then through. Over here, it's a little bit darker, but you can still see a little bit here and up into there. All right, so those come together, and then they go out. In a Cleveland class, they go out straight vertical. But as they're moving to the right, I can imagine what they did with this space was they just, because it's so fundamental to the ship, that they just left, here we are in the aft fire room on the first platform, that it would have been the venting would have went straight through to the third deck, and then as it got to the second deck and the main deck, then it is coming out through those decks. All right, so they didn't actually have to, more than likely, they didn't actually have to mess with any of the paneling, the electrical panel on the right-hand side, on the starboard side, the generators, the turbo generators for the electricity on the starboard side. So they probably said, let's leave this space intact, and as the uptakes are going up, then let's start pushing them out gently through the third deck, or third deck, second deck, and then out. So this trunk would have remained here, more than likely. Right, so we're on the third deck now. Right, so the vents are coming together in this space right here. All right, now if we head up to second deck, you see the same thing. A way for me to tell is there's no doors here. All right, so we know that this is a solidified area, and in this space, this are the uptakes. All right, so looking at the plans right across from the crew's head, so all along here. So you can imagine now on Broadway that the uptakes are beginning to gently come to starboard. So maybe second deck was broken here. Maybe they're beginning to come through the floor. Now you have the main deck up here, and they're coming out. All right, so let's head up to the main deck. Now if I take 10, 12 steps forward, here you go, they're coming out here. And then of course, extending upwards and over. So you can imagine the potentially this bulkhead, this deck house needed to be reconfigured. Certainly the decking here on Main, because now you're having the uptakes come out here. Well, I hope you like this video, this little look into the Independence class. This was actually a suggestion from one of our subscribers maybe about 5 months ago. And I said, oh, let me put it in the 29 and 29. So I hope this gives you some insight. All right, since we are the last of the Clevelands or the Independence, this would be the ship to come and do research with. All right, bring blueprints. Anyone's interested, of course, please let me know, and we'll bring you on board, and you can do your own look into this. Please leave comments, of course. And you know what? We're going to see you tomorrow. Have a good day.